Genghis Khan, sing us back to class! Okay, I sing now.
Clone High. It's Clone High. That's a video. I'm talking about Clone High. Now, if you don't know what Clone High is, first of all, where the fuck have you been? And secondly, Clone High is an adult animated comedy that originally aired in 2003, created by Phil Lord and Christopher Miller. Primarily known for their hits such as Cardio Cats and Meatballs, 21 Jump Street, The Lego Movie, and Into the Spider-Verse. The basic plot is that the show follows the US government making clones of famous historical figures in order to raise them to take over the world, with the main clones being Abraham Lincoln, Joan of Arc, Gandhi, Cleopatra, and John F. Kennedy. And the show follows them as they navigate high school while at the same time getting into regular problems and zany situations. The show's episode structure would usually follow two different plots, with the A plot focusing on Abe, Cleo, JFK, and Joan, while the B plot of every episode usually followed either Gandhi getting himself in a wacky adventure, or Scudworth, the school's principal and the clone's creator, either trying to enact one of his plans to take over the government operation, or doing something with his robot butler slash vice principal Mr. Butlertron. Now the show, while receiving positive reception at the time, didn't have the best ratings. And while MTV was considering giving the show a second season, those plans would quickly fall apart when a controversy revolving around the character of Gandhi would break out in India, which led to hunger strikes and the protesters threatening to revoke MTV's TV license in the country unless the show was pulled from air. This controversy, as well as Phil Chris's indecisiveness in how to handle Gandhi in the show moving forward, led to MTV cancelling Clone High after only 13 episodes, ending the show on a cliffhanger. Until around 2020, when the show garners a lot of attention on social media in the form of fans expressing their nostalgia for the show, and new fans exchanging memes and clips of the characters JFK, Scudworth, and Gandhi. So with this new mass interest in the show and MTV planning a new lineup of adult animated cartoons, MTV announced that Clone High would be getting revived with the original creators Phil Lord, Christopher Miller, and Bill Lawrence all back on board. Now, as someone who originally watched the show on YouTube in 2019, I was really happy to hear this news. Clone High is one of the funniest shows I have ever watched, and seeing how Phil and Chris have been talking for years about how they want to continue it, seeing them finally be given the chance to bring it back after 20 years of trying was really nice to see, and had me and the rest of the fan base excited to see what they had in store for season 2. Fast forwarding to around December 2022, where after a year and a half of silence on the revival, the pilot for it leaks online, and it was certainly something.
Abraham Lincoln, you are cancelled.
It looked like ass. Yeah, after watching this leak when it was released, I and a few others started to notice many problems already being present. Choppy flash animation, jokes not hitting like they used to, absence of a decent plot, and Gandhi just being gone. It didn't have the same feel as the original first season, even though it was still written by Phil and Chris, with the only scenes of the episode that were actually good being the scenes with Scudworth, which still felt like scenes you would see in the original show minus the animation. However, even with the not so good looking quality of the leak, Phil Lord did end up treating that the episode was unfinished, and absolutely did not reflect in the final product. After this, me and everyone else then took a sigh of relief, as the show is most likely going to be at a higher quality of what we just witnessed. And then the show actually released.
You are cancelled.
Oh god, nothing's changed. Alright, now that I've reached the point of talking about the actual revival, I will now explain how I will be going over things here. Rather than listing my individual thoughts on each episode, as well as going over what they did right and what they did wrong, which will mostly have me repeating myself because believe me, a lot of problems carry over throughout the entire season, I will instead be listing my main issues of the revival and how I think they impacted the show the worst, as well as giving some thoughts on how I think they could have handled these issues better. Alright folks, let's get the easy issue out of the way first. The animation here doesn't look the best. It looks really rigged and choppy, with most of the movements of the characters looking slow and awkward. Unlike the original one's faster looking hand-drawn animation, which connected more easily to the show's pacing and comedy. That's not to say that the animation of the new season is entirely terrible. There are some parts of the show where it really looks good and you can tell a lot of effort was put in. But at the same time, this switch to HD and digital animation can make scenes look weird and empty, with some of the show's backgrounds like the cafeteria or some of the outdoor scenes looking very weird and widescreen. This downgrade in the animation quality can also take away a bit of the charm from the original season, which came from the quick snappy poses the characters made, as well as the simplicity of the way the characters moved around and the simple yet abstract backgrounds. Now, it's understandable why the show had to change animation styles, with the industry moving forward into more digital animation to both save costs and decrease time to animate the shows, but I personally just prefer the way the characters were animated and moved around in the original one, as I feel that added its own charm to the characters and the comedy of the original season. Moving on to another aspect of the show's animation, being the character designs. Cutting straight to it, the designs of the new clones do not look good. They look more like regular people instead of actual clones of historical figures, and their designs really clash with the art style and character designs of the season 1 characters, with the only new clone that both looks similar to their original counterpart and the season 1 clones' designs being Christopher Columbus, with him having a more simple colour palette and design compared to the other new characters, which makes him fit more with the group of original clones. Moving on to the other 3 new characters, Frida Kahlo still has the resemblance to her original counterpart, but also has the issue of clashing with the show's original art style with her bright neon colours. While Harriet Tubman, on the other hand, just looks nothing like a clone of Tubman and more of a contestant you'd see on Full Drama. Confucius also suffers the same issue, where his design just looks nothing like a clone of Confucius, and he instead looks like a character that you wouldn't even see in Clone High. You see, the original clones all have aspects in their designs which tell you who is supposed to be who from a first glance. JFK has his hair and body type, Gandhi has his bald head and glasses, and Abe has his tall figure and square head, while Harriet and Confucius have almost nothing in their designs to tell you that they are supposed to be clones, which can make it difficult for the audience to understand at first glance who they are actually supposed to be clones of.
Dug up famous guys and ladies and made them using genetic copies.
Nothing bad ever happens to the Kennedys! What?
Clone High's first season was hilarious. Combining the great writing, excellent vocal performances for the characters and quick-paced animation, it led to the show being filled with so many perfectly timed jokes to the point where I can point out at least 4 jokes from each episode that still get a chuckle out of me to this day. The revival just has none of that writing.
Most TV writers' rooms back then only had one woman. That is unthinkable and very specific.
God almighty. It still has great vocal performances, and with every actor sounding like they're having a fun time, the voice acting is easily one of the biggest highlights of the revival. But the comedic timing and the fast-paced nature of the first season is just gone in this new revival. After season 2 ended a few weeks ago, I decided to rewatch the entire first season of the original show to compare them and find the strongest points where the revival failed at. And it really became evident to me how unfunny the revival is compared to the original one. Like in season 1, there were plenty of quick jokes, great joke delivery from the actors, and fast quick-paced animation that helped the comedy be delivered almost perfectly. While season 2 instead doesn't spend a lot of its time telling multiple jokes per minute like the original. And the ones it tries and does tell are just either not on the same level as the original one or just fall flat on their face upon delivery. An example of the second season's humour is in scenes where the old clones are being introduced to modern technology, which results in a lot of the same "wow, things sure are different from our time" jokes. These types of jokes have already been done to death by most modern revivals that I have seen, and I was hoping that if Clone High was going to take a crack at these jokes, they would at least try to do something unique with the idea. But instead, we just got a lot of jokes about the characters discovering things like TikTok or drones and just talking about how amazing they are, which at the end of the day just comes off as unfunny referential humour. And that's not even before touching some of the episode's overall humour, starting with episode 1, which is about cancel culture.
Cancelled.
God, that word fucking kills me. Now, I'm not going to make a whole big 4-paragraph section about the first episode's humour, plenty already have. So the TLDR is that Abe says some things that people in 2003 used to say that are now offensive, which result in him getting cancelled. And the rest of the episode's humour is about Abe digging himself further into the hole by either saying even more offensive things or just acting like a dick to Joan because she has become more popular with the new clones. And the way Abe is written as the episode progresses just doesn't feel like the way he was written in the original show, as he is portrayed more in this episode as antagonistic towards Joan and jealous of her becoming more popular than him, rather than just ignorant and more kinder like in the original series. Quickly also wanted to bring up episode 5, which was a musical, which made me want to drill screws into my eardrums.
My heart is in a twister, not referring to the movie with Helen.
Thinking about it, the only parts of the show that are consistently funny now throughout the whole revival are the plots of Scudworth and Mr. Bottletron. They are both the only characters who feel like and are written exactly how they were in the original one, with their plots being the only time I actually feel an emotion that isn't either boredom or why am I still watching this, please help me. Another problem I feel like has affected the comedy of the revival is the absence of the character Gandhi. Now, we all know why Gandhi is gone, I talked about it in the beginning of the video, but his absence still hurts the comedy of the revival as a good majority of the humour came from him and the show's B-plots featuring him. The stories with him making a spy movie of Carver or going to prison were some of the most memorable and funniest parts of the original show for me, and it really does hurt the overall enjoyment of the comedy now that he is no longer featured in the cast. The last thing I'll bring up about the revival's comedy is the surprisingly heavy amount of gore that is present. Like, I know the original one still had its bits of gore and violence, but those moments were only used sparingly, with the only episode I remember heavily leaning into that type of humour being Snowflake Day, which works because it fits with the irony of the episode being sold as a simple happy holiday special. But the revival doesn't have any irony to work off, it just throws in moments of characters being beaten to the point of bleeding for no reason. Moments like Scudworth stabbing himself and spraying blood everywhere, or Cleopatra severely herself, go on for an uncomfortably long amount of time and are not moments that are brief, quick, or used sparingly like in the original season.
Now the clones are sexy teens now. They're gonna make it if they try.
Now, in the first season of Clone High, the show had 5 main clones, those being Abe, Joan, Gandhi, Cleo, and JFK. And while they're not very deeply written, they all had very different personalities from each other, which allowed each of them to feel unique. Abe was a shy pushover, Joan was a calm voice of reason, Gandhi was a wacky comedy relief, Cleo was a tempered competitor, and JFK was a self-centered popular idiot. Each of these characters' personalities were all different and distinct from each other, which allowed them to work off each other really well in almost every scene. They also each got to have their moments in every single episode of the original one, making it so that none of them felt like they were taking too much spotlight away from the other. The revival, however, has a problem where it does not handle their main cast in the same way as the original. Now, before I go into the detail of this major issue, I need to explain how they actually got themselves into this problem. Starting off, Gandhi is no longer in the show, blah blah blah, we already know this, so that's one character knocked down. So the show, rather than just introducing one character to take the spot of Gandhi and keep the balance of the original series, decides to instead introduce 4 new characters into the main cast, which now gives the show 8 main clones to work with and fit into every episode rather than just a regular 5. But what if the show just didn't use every character in every episode? Which leads directly into the main character problem with Clone High Season 2, the fact that there are just too many main characters now, and because of this, the show has to sideline most of them in most of the episodes. This problem meant that characters like Cleopatra, who was a major character in every episode of the first season, just sort of got sidelined in the first 3 episodes, only getting less than 15 lines between the first 3 episodes, which is minuscule compared to the first season. Now, luckily characters like Abe, Joan, and JFK are still on the show for the majority of the episodes, and they still act the same as they did in the original show, for the most part. But now the show just has to juggle the original characters with the newer ones, leading to some characters being overshadowed in the new episodes, or simply just not having any relevance whatsoever, unlike the original show where everyone felt like they were having just the right amount of screen time in every moment. Getting into the new characters themselves, let's start with Christopher Columbus, who is easily the new clone that fits the most for the season 1 cast, with both his simple design and his actually unique personality. Basically in the show, Christopher Columbus now goes by the alias Topher Bus after everyone found out the original Columbus was a dickhead. And in order to hide his heritage and sever his connection to his clone father, he is now masking himself as a social justice activist in order to not arouse suspicion from anyone. But behind his mask is actually a deranged lunatic who spends all day trolling people online and having some very messed up goals and opinions. And Columbus, because of his personality, is easily one of the more funnier parts of the revival and is easily my favourite addition to the main cast. Moving on to the other 3 new characters, let's talk about Confucius. There's not much to say about Confucius, other than he likes being on social media and is the rich kid in the group, helping the characters get money at some points when they need it. He doesn't really do much other than these few personality traits and is mostly just kind of there for most of the season, just mainly a blank slate for writers to throw stories or jokes onto, with him only actually starting to get his own storyline in episode 7 where it's revealed that he has a crush on Harriet, but other than this, he's as generic as a character can get. And then there's Frida Kahlo and Harriet Tubman, who both have very similar personality traits of just being nice to others, with the differences being that Kahlo is more chill and cool while Harriet is more of a control freak. They do have more moments of Confucius in the season, however, with Harriet having a badly written love arc with JFK before having one with Confucius near the end of the season, as well as Kahlo having her own story arc where she develops feeling for and gets into a relationship with Cleopatra. But ignoring these little arcs near the end of the season, most of the time Kahlo, Tubman, and Confucius aren't really doing anything as interesting as the original characters or Columbus, which results in them just kind of being there most of the time. They don't even have any jokes relating to their clone parents as much as the original cast or Columbus. In the original season, there were always subtle jokes that poked fun at the irony about how these clones of famous historical people were acting and how they were complete 180s of how their clone parents were. Examples being how Gandhi was nothing like the actual karma collecting Mohan and was instead more animated and active, or how JFK was a sex-obsessed idiot, unlike the actual professional politician the real John F. Kennedy was. These new clones, except for Columbus, have none of this humour and could easily have these traits of being clones removed from them, and still not act any differently than how they originally do, unlike the original cast of clones who rely on their clone heritage in order to make their personalities work.
Attend to one.
During season 1, there was an overarching story that went on across the season, which revolved around a love triangle between Abe, Joan and Cleo, which went on and evolved as the season progressed. And while it existed to mainly take the piss out of teenage drama shows that did the exact same type of plot during the early 2000s, in shows like Dawson's Creek and 90210, it still at least felt like a more consistent and planned out story than the story that this season tried to tell. The overarching storyline in season 2 kind of continues the events of season 1, but not really. Let me explain. In the end of season 1, the main story arc ended with Abe breaking up with Cleo after developing feelings for Joan. But right then, Joan and JFK fall in love, and Abe unfortunately only decides to tell Joan his feelings right after her and JFK sleep together in the meat locker. Why am I explaining this in a serious tone? What is this show doing to me? Help me. Now, the revival season does continue some aspects of this plot. JFK and Joan are dating, and Abe is now in the same position as Joan in the first season, but a big aspect of the plot that is just left in the dust and just barely brought up is Cleopatra. Cleo was not given any time to talk about what happened with her and Abe at all this entire season, and it just feels like the show's completely missing the opportunity to give both Cleo and Abe some character development from their breakup. Now, that's not to say that Cleo does not get any character development in this season. An example being in episode 4, which actually ends the rivalry between her and Joan that started back in season 1. But it just feels wrong that an entire plotline from season 1 is just left without any resolution and is essentially just ignored for the entire season. Moving back into the story arcs, we already have the main love triangle between Joan, Abe and JFK to deal with. But in episode 5, the show decides to introduce a new storyline where JFK and Harriet start to develop feelings for each other. For some reason. And the show initially makes you think that by the end of the episode, this is going to be the start of another love triangle. Until the very next episode, where it just abruptly ends halfway through, with the fallout of Joan finding out not even lasting more than a minute. Then, in the very next episode, it is just abruptly brought up that Confucius has feelings for Harriet and Frida Kahlo has feelings for Cleo, which both become actual relationships in episode 8. Only for episode 10 to break up Harriet and Confucius abruptly without warning. What the fuck is this? As you can see, the main problem with the writing of the relationships this season is that they never feel consistent, always bringing in potential plots and arcs only to immediately end them or throw them out the window 1 to 2 episodes later, making this season's story never feel consistent, unlike the original one where the story and overarching arcs, even though they were clearly meant to be parodies, at least felt planned out from beginning to end, rather than the show introducing multiple plot points and becoming as consistent as Kingdom Hearts were by the season's end. And even though I'm not a fan of this more serious storyline, unlike season 1's more comedic storytelling, I at least expected the writing to be better than what we were given here. However, that is not to say that all the season's writing is bad. As I said earlier, the Scudworth and Mr. Butlertron plots are easily the best part of the season. Hell, episode 9 was great because it only focused on them two. But unfortunately, a few subplots and 1 out of 10 episodes being good just isn't enough to justify the major writing issues this season ended up having. Clone High's first season is one of the funniest shows I've ever seen and is probably one of my personal favourites as well. So with this in mind, I really did try to give the second season a chance, even with all the negatives that ended up plaguing it. But what now remains is just a show that barely resembles the original first season at all, with most of the writing being either underwhelming or just bad, jokes just not hitting like they used to or just being plain unfunny, and the inconsistent design choices with the new clones all make this revival look like a husk of what used to be an actual genuinely funny and great show, but the only things that let you know that this is still Clone High being some of the visuals and most of the characters still being there. This however doesn't mean that everything in this season was terrible. There were still some qualities that are good and can be appreciated from the second season, like Scudworth and Mr. Butlertron's plot still being funny and memorable, the entirety of episode 9 just being great, and the still great vocal performances that the actors bring to the show, and not all the jokes were total misses either. But compared to the problems that this revival does and still is currently facing right now, these positives just aren't enough for me to currently call this a good show. And I would say that I'm very hopeful that season 3 improves upon the quality of this season, but after every episode except for 9 failing to be good aside from a few moments and some subplots, as well as the writing and recording already being done last year, I sadly don't really have much hope for the show right now, which really does hurt to say. Please keep in mind that I'm not necessarily condemning the show forever here, as I will let the show prove me wrong if it does end up improving on some of the aspects I've listed today. But it's just hard for me to see how they can improve the show in its current state unless the people behind us actually take a step back and just think about where they want the show to go after season 3. Which is why, at this current moment of time, Clone High is just a shell of its former self. Hello everyone, ChuckySkip here. If you are hearing this, then congratulations! My ramblings about my hyperfixations didn't piss you off or annoy you enough to click off. Serious voice now, just wanted to say thank you for taking the time to watch this video to the very end. This is my first proper full video here, and I appreciate you watching this to hear my thoughts on Clone High 2nd season. And if you are interested in more videos like this, please consider subscribing. I will try to make these videos whenever I have the time or if I have a cool idea. And if you do have any thoughts on the topic of this video or the video itself, please share them in the comments. I'd really love to hear feedback about what you think of my first video here. Anyways, that's all for now. Probably going to take a break for a little bit since this video alone took me 2 weeks to edit because of my fucked up schedule. Thank you for watching, and I will see you all eventually. Maybe. I don't fucking know when.
But the battle goes on, shadows all mass destruction.
Oh yeah,